And then there were four teams remain playing for college football's championship, and one of them is not Alabama. That after their blowout loss in the Rose Bowl yesterday against Indiana. You have to wonder what all this means for their fan base and Kalen DeBoer and everything else. That 35-point loss, the largest bowl loss or postseason loss in the history of the program. And so, speaking of programs, recommended listening today would be Paul Finebaum's radio program throughout the entire southeastern part of the country. What are you anticipating, Paul, the Alabama fans and faithful will be saying when they call you to talk about this today?
Greeny, I think it will be an absolute bloodbath for Kalen DeBoer, and I'm basing that on just the reaction I've been getting since the end, really since halftime of the Rose Bowl yesterday. I have rarely, if ever, heard Alabama fans this angry, and part of the reason they're angry is they got behind Kalen DeBoer a couple of weeks ago when he was considering Penn State, when he looked like maybe he was going to Michigan, and then Alabama came from 17 down to beat Oklahoma. They wrapped their arms around him and sang Kumbaya, and now they've had it shoved down their throat by Curt Cignetti, who is a Nick Saban disciple, who coached yesterday like Nick Saban, an Indiana team that looked like Alabama under Nick Saban. And that's what is driving Alabama fans crazy today, that their team was soft, their team got beaten at the line of scrimmage, their team got beaten into submission, which are the principles of how Nick Saban coached throughout his entire career. Now, Cignetti is doing that in Indiana, a school that not a single Alabama fan respected. And now they're having it shoved down their throat. It tastes terrible, and they will react bitterly against the man in charge, and that's Kalen DeBoer.
How should they react, Josh Pate?
Well, they should be angry. Everybody in that building should be angry, and that's not to take anything away from Indiana. Like, Indiana, better team. As it turns out, Indiana should have been picked, by people like me when you're putting your actual money on things. But I think when you look at it, it's one thing to lose away Kirby and Georgia lost last night, where you have a transcendent quarterback performance. At some point, you just tip your cap. Saban did that when Deshaun Watson beat him, when Manziel beat him. That was not what we saw in the Rose Bowl yesterday. What we saw in the Rose Bowl yesterday is someone who worked for Nick Saban, who packaged everything up, not just in terms of performance. Performance is downstream of principle. Curt Cignetti runs Indiana the way Saban ran Alabama. They're not fueled by doubt and disrespect. It may seem that way. They're not. And that's why even if they're successful, they'll continue to go on and be successful over and over and over again. It's because they work to a standard. It's the same list of phrases you used to hear Saban talk about all the time. So one of the non-negotiables under Saban was, we may get beat, but we're never going to get beat because we can't run the football. 2 years in a row, Alabama's been defeated several times because they can't run the football. And so Kalen DeBoer, like, the internal questions here, forget about the externals. The internal question has to be, what kind of moves do you have to make? Your offensive coordinator was fired from the Seahawks because they couldn't run the football last year. And now you can't run it this year. And I know good and well that's not the way he plans on mapping the future of Alabama football. There's some really, really tough decisions that have to be made from a staffing perspective inside that building.
What do you think, Harry?
Yeah, I'm going to chime on with what Josh just said. I don't think you can go through the SEC and feel like you're going to be a premier team and win a national championship being one-dimensional. When you look at the last 3 games for the Alabama Crimson Tide and how they rushed, -3 versus Georgia, 28 yards versus Oklahoma, 23 yards versus Indiana, a total of 48 yards in their last 3 ball games. That's a mindset. That starts in the offseason, that starts in training camp, and until they change that, you're going to continuously see what happened to them this week. On and on and on.
And that also leaves a lot of questions. We're doing the Alabama piece of it here for those of you Indiana fans. We're going to get into full coverage of the Indiana side of this as we continue in a moment, because to the victor go the spoils, and clearly right now they look like the best team. But Jordan, we went into this game and this tournament saying there was a lot at stake for Alabama's quarterback, Ty Simpson. Now we've seen the way that played out. For those of you who didn't watch the game yesterday, he didn't look particularly good. Then he got hurt, which was terrible, and had to come out of the game. So where does that leave him, Jordan?
Ty Simpson should come back to school. I think if he went on a run in this playoffs, I've said it before, I've said it on this show many times, I think he could have played his way into QB 1 or 2 in a top 10 or first round draft pick. I don't think that's the case. And if you look at his body of work, he's still just a first-year starter with a team that couldn't run the football. He can absolutely improve his draft stock. I don't think he should come out in this day and age. If you're a quarterback, I don't think you should come out to be a second-round pick. You have so much guaranteed money to stay in college and the ability to improve your draft stock and get more guaranteed money if you are a first-round draft pick, a top 10 draft pick. So the ability to create or have an offseason where hopefully, Like everybody's talking up here, and Harry, those numbers are absurd. 48 yards in 3 combined games rushing for Alabama. No quarterback's going to play well when you're that unbalanced. So Kalen DeBoer and this staff, whether it is Ryan Grubb, whoever's there, whatever changes are made, they got to be able to build around the guy like Ty Simpson. He can absolutely still be a guy that can be a top 10 draft pick. I just think the smart move would be come back to school after what we saw.
If he does, Paul, quickly, for those in the know, would it be at Alabama? Because they've got a kid waiting in the wings behind him. I've heard a lot of questions about that. What is the situation with that, Paul?
Yeah, Alabama fans really like him, and he's such an outstanding young man. I know that sounds cliche, but in Ty Simpson's case, it's true. He's the son of a coach. He does everything right. I don't think you can blame him for what we have just gone through talking about. I mean, if he had even an average or a subpar running game, he would be a much better quarterback. So I don't think it's a bad idea to come back. But you said something about Keelan Russell a minute ago. 5-star, everybody has been salivating about him. So that's going to be an interesting dilemma with this portal, of course, open right now.
All right, everybody stay close by. We'll do much more on this as we go, but I have Joe Fortenbaugh here, as I always do on Fridays, for different bets and things like that. Coming off of yesterday's game, what has been the Vegas reaction to a dominant performance by Indiana?
I think what you're going to start to see here is Indiana's reaching that peak market value. Let's go back to October when these two met in Eugene. Oregon was laying 7.5. Now, Indiana wins that game. 2 months later, though, we're looking at an 11.5-point swing to a neutral site game. Absolutely, there needs to be a swing. Indiana's much better now than they reviewed at the time. But the question from a betting perspective becomes, has it moved too much? So much of what we do here with sports betting is psychology. I want you to think about what the national opinion was of Indiana going into yesterday's game. There were people that liked them, but there were a lot of people that were still in a prove-it mindset. Indiana has to go prove it for me to believe. Well, now that they've throttled Alabama, who, let's be honest, this isn't an Alabama team that we saw under Nick Saban. They were highly vulnerable. Now that they've throttled a team like that, everyone's come all the way around. Now they're a juggernaut. Now they're the favorite. Now everybody loves them. They're deserving of all the credit they're getting, but that might make them a bit overvalued, which is why you want to consider taking the 4 with Oregon.
-4 doesn't seem like that much. If you had asked me coming off of those games yesterday where I thought that number would be, I think I would have thought they would have been a slightly bigger favorite than that.
House of Greenberg. Let's open up a sports book. Let me bet into that.
And it would close almost immediately. If you know anything about my history, hashtag KOD, I am. Let me put some of the numbers up. If there were any questions about Fernando Mendoza, he most certainly answered them. And Harry, you brought up this stat earlier. Against pressure, he was 8 for 8 with 3 passing touchdowns against the blitz. On throws 20 yards downfield, he was a perfect 4 for 4 with 2 touchdowns. So a variety of different ways to look at this. And let's start with Jordan Rogers, who's with us here this morning. We have Schrager, I think, with us from Tampa as well. Outstanding. But Jordan, I start with you because there's been a lot of, is Mendoza the number 1 quarterback in this draft? Is Dante Moore the number 1 quarterback in this draft? What did you come away from yesterday thinking?
Yeah, he convinced me that he should be the number 1 overall pick in this draft. And I had always been leaning towards Dante Moore. I think in the NFL draft process, as you evaluate, you really start to fall in love with some intangibles, athleticism, right? Arm talent. How can you throw it sidearm, 80 yards downfield if you need to? The thing we overlook often is processing and decision-making under pressure and just accuracy. And that's what we saw in full display from Fernando Mendoza, the under pressure numbers, the accuracy downfield. He even made some plays with his legs. And as you look at comps, it's not as easy to comp a guy that's a really good decision maker that's more of a pocket passer. How about a Jared Goff that in 2016 as a rookie was 0-7 with Jeff Fisher, but with the right system the next couple of years and Sean McVay went 11-4 and 13-3. Fernando Mendoza is a guy that in the right system in the NFL with pieces around you can absolutely be a guy like Jared Goff and have that success because of the decision making. So although he loves reading and crunching Excel sheets, Harry, I got to get one in because that boy bad.
Nice.
That's
nice.
That's what I'm talking about, George.
That's very well done. That's a gutsy move, but I think we all appreciated it. Schrager, let me come to you on this because the NFL, he's got at least 1, if not 2 more games in college yet, and then the draft process will really completely begin. What are you hearing from the people around the NFL about Mendoza?
Well, there were those who were trying to nitpick the last few weeks and going from the Big Ten championship game and really doing the film work. I was texting with all the GMs about Mendoza heading in. And the question was, well, what's he going to do against another one of those top defenses or one of those top programs? Let's see. Well, 38-3 and all of those big pass plays tell you something. The comp that I got, which was interesting, and I'd be curious your thoughts, was not Jared Goff, but Matt Ryan, which is different than the Kirk Cousins that we've been hearing or some of the other names. Matt Ryan's a former MVP, and the way that he can process, stand in the pocket, is capable out of the gates to come in here. Remember, he's 23-10 as a college quarterback, and in a world where Bo Nix and Tyler Shuck were able to come in right away after long college careers, that seems to be what's in vogue right now, more so than the raw product, say an Anthony Richardson or maybe even a Dante Moore, where they don't have a ton of college experience, don't have a ton of college starts, and might not be that day one guy.
Well, if only we had someone sitting at our desk who used to play with Matt Ryan and caught passes from him and knows him about as well as you can possibly know him. What do you think of that? You have some tape on Mendoza.
Yeah, I do, and I want to show this and how he processes things. And you look at this very first play, cover zero, you're going to see the defense try to play, but he's so good at understanding what's going on. Charlie Becker's going to be in the slot. He's going to run a post route. But watch how Mendoza, number one, sits in this pocket. Great job by the running back, blocking the guy that's coming on a blitz, giving him time in the pocket. But ball placement is everything when you talk about defeating the blitz. Look at where he puts this. Charlie Becker is a 6'4" wide receiver. He puts it up when only his guy can catch the football. Now, this next play, we used to call this both races. Julio Jones and Roddy White used to run this route. Since we're making a comp for Matt Ryan, he used to throw touchdowns to these guys all the time on both races. Great job with the details of the game. Ball fake, getting the defense to suck up, and then allowing these guys to win their one-on-one matchups on the outside when they're playing man coverage, the defense against them. Great job, touchdown pass to Omar Cooper Jr. But then you're going to see this next play. You're going to have a 3rd and 1. The defense is expecting run, so it's man coverage on the outside. The DB is playing 2 yards inside. They're going to run a slow-go, what we call a slant and go. Great job with ball placement right here where only his guy can catch the football. You talk about Matt Ryan. I was drafted the same year in 2008 with Matt, and what stood out to with him from every other quarterback, very cerebral, the details of the game, and throwing with anticipation, and definitely defeating the blitz. That's the same thing that I'm seeing for Fernando Mendoza that I've seen from Matt Ryan being able to play with him.
So it's an interesting comp. And Bart, I turn to you sort of from an NFL perspective. We're looking at a few different teams up at the top. You're looking at the Raiders, who have right now the inside track to the number 1 pick. You're looking at the Jets, who figure to pick very high and desperately need a quarterback and might have to make a trade to move up. You're looking at the Giants, who have Jackson Dart, and I think the conventional wisdom is that they stay with him, but anything, I suppose, is possible. What is your sense of all of this?
I mean, I've been having these conversations for probably the past month about it started with Mike Tannenbaum that planted that seed in New York, of course. But, people are saying, should they maybe consider Fernando Mendoza? Because when you think about
being
the Giants, right? When you think about the Giants maybe moving on from Jackson Dart. And this is the thing. We have a regime change. We'll have a new coach, and who knows if we're going to have a new general manager. We're all praying for Mara. Hope all that works out. But it is a scenario, and it is a world and a reality where, you just said Matt Ryan. When you talk about Matt Ryan, you get the extra year, and who knows what the Raiders are going to do. The Raiders sometimes go Raiders. Right? And they have Geno Smith. So if they feel like Dante Moore has the higher ceiling, then they may have the patience to say he can sit behind Geno and he can get the maturity and time to develop behind as we continue to build this roster around him. So the question has been, Jets, of course, they take them. But, will the Jets or the Giants maybe even work together and give up some of that draft equity that they got for the trades that they made, because Cleveland is always in the wings, too, with 2 first-round draft picks to move up. So the good thing is we get to see them both on the field together going against each other. And I think if Dante Moore, acquits himself very well, he can play himself into that conversation.
Dante Moore played against a very good defense in Texas Tech yesterday. We haven't really touched on that much, Jordan. What was your takeaway from his performance in the first game yesterday?
Yeah, I thought he played well. Look, that Texas Tech front is the real deal, and he was under pressure a few times. There was a couple mistakes that he made forcing the football when maybe he didn't need to, but largely that game was in control, so they didn't need Dante Moore to do too much. But plays like that right there, under pressure, falling away, getting the ball out quickly, changing his arm angle, falling away. That's what I loved about his game. Even that throw down the middle, layering the football, getting the ball up and over those second-level defenders. So there is still a ton to love about Dante Moore, and the age aspect of it. Him only going to be 20 years old. There's a lot of football ahead of him. But I go back to what Schrag said. I think there has been a little bit of a philosophical change in the way you evaluate these quarterbacks and in what these quarterbacks are bringing to the table, and the fact that in this NIL transfer portal era, you got guys that have played in 2 or 3 systems. So many times over the past decades, you got a talented quarterback that was in one system for 3 or 4 years. And then you get them into a new system, into the NFL, gets better talent, and it takes a long time for that processing to catch up in that new system. Guys have already done that. Guys are playing better quicker, and they don't need to have the athleticism or the crazy intangibles if the decision-making, like Fernando Mendoza has, can be the winner because he's seen so much football. He's played so much football already, even though he'll step on the field as a quote-unquote rookie in the NFL. I think that's a little bit of the change we're seeing, and that'll play big into the evaluation process.
How about it, Peter?
Yeah, and look, the biggest X factor in all this is the guy I saw last night, and I've been texting about Trinidad Chambliss, and that's a door number 3 guy who I think, you've been doing stuff with Field Yates and Mel Kiper. Chambliss has been talked about as a day 3 potential pick, but the expectation is he's going to get this medical waiver and he's going to be allowed to come back to college. I think the player wants to come back to college. If you're not aware, he played at Ferris State where he won 2 Division II titles. But right now, he's a redshirt senior and does not have eligibility next year, but he has put in for a waiver to get that. The NCAA is sitting on their hands. Transfer portal is opening up. He still hasn't heard. So if he doesn't get that waiver, Chambliss suddenly becomes a draft prospect or is draft eligible and will be forced to go to the NFL draft. And if he has this wild ride through the national, playoffs and ends up getting as a national champion, he might be able to rise up on boards just because of the lack and dearth of quarterbacks in this draft.
Yeah, he's 23 years old. He would become you're right. He is not someone we've talked a lot about on First Draft or those kinds of conversations, but he could play his way into being that. All 4 quarterbacks who are remaining are transfers. So to Jordan's point, every one of the 4 quarterbacks, whoever it is that wins the championship, will be doing it having played for at least 2 different programs. We'll get to some NFL conversation next. The NFC's top seed is up for grabs on Saturday.